Hi, I'm Ash from DroningON, and in part 1 of this video we'll be unboxing something brand new. We are the very first to be reviewing this, and it is the first of its kind to be sent outside of China. So, it's compact, it's small, no it's not a Mavic, but you'll definitely find it very, very interesting. Please be sure to subscribe by pressing the link in the top corner. Enjoy the review. Remember this? It's back. We've been sent the latest version of OnagoFly. It's called the OnagoFly 1Plus. We know very little about it at this time, so in this review we'll be unboxing what we've been sent. We'll have a look at it, we'll do a comparison, and then of course in the next video we'll be flight testing it. So let's unbox what we've got. For a minute, I didn't think we were actually going to be getting into that. It was packaged as if nobody was ever meant to open the box. Let's hope that's not the case. So the box is clearly much bigger than the original OnagoFly, and then this is a bigger aircraft. So as before, the box is a nice quality piece of packaging, and it looks nice and informative in terms of the basics. So we're told it's 1080p, GPS follow mode, app control, tilt mode, live streaming, changeable battery, now that's key. GPS hovering was intermittent on the previous one, and dual IC. Not necessarily relevant to an end user, but it's essentially dual circuitry inside. So opening the box up, let's see what we have inside. So first of all, we have the instruction manual, which actually on the previous version was a little bit vague, and a lot of the content inside that manual differed from actually flying the aircraft itself. But I think that's because primarily the evolution of the previous version was so rapid that after they documented and printed something, it had been changed in the app or the firmware. So there's our manual. We have the charger, which looks to be exactly the same as the charger from the previous OnagoFly. You can see there the comparison with the specification, they're both identical, and actually if you look at the production date on the two, it's exactly the same, so that nothing has changed here with the charger, and they're still using the same unit that they shipped out with the original OnagoFly. Under here is the aircraft itself. Now this one is black. You may remember on the original OnagoFly, the black version, known as the stealth version, was a limited edition one. Whereas it looks like potentially the 1Plus, perhaps they're all black, I don't know, we will have to find out. So first thing is the weight. On the previous OnagoFly, the first thing I commented was how heavy it was. It was really substantially overweight, whereas this model feels particularly light compared to that one. The motors look to be about the same size and scale actually as the previous one. We'll compare the two shortly. So we have a power button here, a black push power button with a little LED in the center of that as well. We have an SD card slot here for micro SD. There's also a USB port here. One of the big problems with the original model of the OnagoFly was that the port broke very easily due to its design being on the seam, and SD cards got stuck inside. Hopefully that won't happen with this. There is the camera. Sadly, it's again a fixed camera angle, and this angle looks to be more forward, horizontally facing than angled down as the previous model. We'll compare those shortly. This is the key difference here. We have a removable battery bay. This, of course, should solve some of the issues with overheating and melting of components that we saw on the previous OnagoFly. But it also means, of course, the battery is now interchangeable, which is clearly going to make a massive difference, assuming this thing flies. The legs are also rubberized. So one of the other problems with the OnagoFly before is that it would slide around on the ground, which was very irritating. This should give it a bit of grip. And we have the same or very similar plastic panel here, which I'd assume is removable. This is where the GPS antenna sat. One of the big problems with the original OnagoFly is that the antenna wasn't seated properly on the contacts underneath. Let's hope they've also solved that. So that's the aircraft. Let's have a look at what else is in the box. In here we have a power cable, and a USB cable. Obviously this is a US connector, but I've got a plug adapter for that. This is a pre-distribution model, I should make that clear. And so I would assume that for anybody ordering this outside of the US or China, you will be shipped the appropriate connector, we hope. In here we have props and 2 spare sets, black and orange, plus a prop removal tool. That's nice because getting the props off the previous version was a nightmare. So we have perhaps not enough props based on our experience of the previous OnagoFly. I note that the tips of these props are rounded, unlike the previous OnagoFly, which had large spade type props. These look much better quality than the props supplied with the previous OnagoFly. There is the battery. So this is a proprietary design, obviously designed specifically to fit into the case of the OnagoFly. So obviously some effort's been made here to design this battery in this way. It's a 2-cell 1000 milliamp. Now before we found that the rating of the battery specified by OnagoFly was not correct. So we'll be interested to look at the flight time. So let's have a look at putting that in. So slide it in. It clicks in place like that, very smoothly. I would say actually the build quality on this new OnagoFly is far better than the old one. It has a kind of rubberized plastic feeling to it, but it does feel like a lot more time and effort's been put into the build of this. It feels like a decent product. Okay, and then removing the battery. Easier said than done. Might need to consult the instruction manual actually. That doesn't seem to want to come out. What else do we have in the box? Now, this is certainly new. We have a set of prop guards. The previous OnagoFly was pretty deadly. When it did fly away, it caused a few injuries. So it's nice to see that they finally have decided to provide this model with a set of prop guards. And there we go. And there's the OnagoFly with the prop guards fitted. Really good to see that OnagoFly are finally thinking about safety because there were reports of the previous version injuring people. That's what comes in the box of the OnagoFly 1Plus. Let's now have a closer look at the aircraft itself in comparison with the previous OnagoFly. So here we have the new OnagoFly 1Plus sat next to the original OnagoFly. This little thing was plagued with problems, largely due to its physical design. These arms were far too short, which meant the airflow from the props over that body interrupted and disrupted its flight characteristics so much that this little thing just wobbled around in the air, and the slightest bit of turbulence or wind and it would just flop and fall. This new aircraft has a much more professional look. A lot more consideration has gone into the design. First of all, it's got prop guards, of course, finally, but also just the general shape of it. There looks to be much more clearance over these arms, so the props are not going to extend over the body. The bodies of the two are actually very similar in size, and I wouldn't be surprised if the internals are very similar as well. Looking at the front here, so you'll notice that one key element is that the obstacle avoidance has gone. It just didn't work on this one because it used IR, infrared, which is just not reliable. So infrared sensors have gone. The motors are virtually the same size, I notice. In fact, I think they're the same motor. The old OnagoFly had plenty of power, but it just wasn't controlled properly. I think these motors will be sufficient, perhaps a little bit undersized, but this thing is lighter, so it's again power to weight ratio. In terms of the cameras, the camera lens looks to be very, very similar, but the angle is different. So if we turn these on the profile, I'm not sure if you'll be able to see this very clearly, the angle at which this camera faces downwards is much less severe than the old OnagoFly. So that means you're going to get more of a forward-facing view than just down. That was one of the big complaints of the original OnagoFly, that the lens was unadjustable and it was too downward pointing. So hopefully they've got a good balance in this new angle. The feet are rubberized on this new one, so it won't slide around when it's on the ground. And that was one of the big problems with this little thing. It was just, takeoff was a bit of a nightmare. The battery bay clearly is an improvement, of course. This has a removable battery. The old version didn't. Many of us made modifications to ours, such as adding this custom switch here, which helped, but ultimately it's a bit of a bodge. It also means that when you're at the flying field, you can't fly it 2 times in a row, because when your battery's dead, you've got to wait for it to charge. If we look at the 2 SD card slots on these aircraft, the old one, the seam was so close to the SD card slot that this little bit of plastic here would snap, meaning that people lost their SD card inside. The seam is much higher now on this new model, and in general this moulding looks to be better quality, so hopefully there won't be so many issues as before. I unfortunately don't have any scales at the moment, but in terms of the weight, there is quite a substantial difference. I would say, considering its size, that this thing is actually heavier than the new OnePlus, even with the OnePlus battery installed. Next, we'll talk about props. On the original OnagoFly, the props were simply push on. That had a number of issues. Mainly, these props would easily fly off if they weren't installed properly or if the hole had become too big. The new aircraft, fortunately, introduces a threaded motor system, a little bit like most Phantoms and modern aircraft. Underneath each arm, there is a character, so A or a B. That indicates which prop you should install. So the props also have a numbering on them, as well as a direction to spin them, so that you know which way you need to turn it to lock it. So if we put the prop on there, they are also threaded, and literally spin it into place like that. That's that installed. So a much more secure system of installing props. Much better than the old system for sure. So that's all of the props installed. We're now ready to get flying. So let's get the battery charged. So the main difference here between this OnagoFly and the old OnagoFly is this cable, which we have a different connector on the end here. So this snaps into the battery like so. Plug the other end into the charger, and that gives you an idea of actually how charged it is now. So we've got 4 lights, meaning it's fully charged. But we'll plug it in, turn it on, and see what happens. Okay, so very much like the Phantom range and exactly the same as the previous model, this charger works in exactly the same way. We'll wait for that 4th LED to go solid, and then we'll consider taking this for a test flight. So that's the unboxing of the OnagoFly 1Plus. Overall, it's a much better designed aircraft. It's lighter, it finally has a removable battery, it has prop guards, screw-on props, rubber supports on the legs, but more importantly, it has longer arms, so hopefully the airflow from the props will be much more efficient. OnagoFly are not selling this via a crowdfund campaign. They'll be selling it directly to retailers and consumers, and therefore they know that this thing has to work. We'll be testing that in the next video in our flight test. So be sure to subscribe, like, comment and share to watch that video as soon as it's released. Thank you for watching.